I'm a nurse who makes $109 an hour. I'm not a travel nurse. I'm not an agency nurse. I don't work crazy hours. I work 5 8-hour shifts in a row. And then I get 9 days off in a row. My wife, Monica, is also a nurse and she's per diem. She picks her own schedule and she even makes more than I do. $140 an hour. And here's the thing, we're not special. We just got out of New York City. And once we did, everything changed. Because back when we were staff nurses in New York, I thought I was doing all right. I was making just under $110,000 a year. I figured that was the ceiling. I thought the only way to earn more was to go back to school and become a nurse practitioner or work 60, 70, even 80 hours a week. But then something happened that changed everything. This was back in 2016. I was precepting a Columbia University nursing student and we started talking about pay. And when I told her how much we earned at my hospital, she looked confused. Not because it was high, but because it was low. She told me both her parents were nurses and they were each making over $200,000 a year while working less than 40 hours per week. I didn't believe her, so I asked her if she could show me some kind of proof, and a few days later, she came back to the unit with a sheet of paper. It was the salary steps for a bunch of New York City hospitals, Presbyterian, Mount Sinai, Montefiore, and then at the end of the list was Kaiser in California. At the time, a senior nurse at the hospital that I worked for could earn $112,830, but our hospital only paid a $3.50 an hour differential for night shift. So even with that, the total annual salary a nurse could earn was around $119,655 a year. Meanwhile, the starting salary for a nurse at Kaiser in 2017 was $126,874. And that moment absolutely broke me. Like, if any one of you know me, you know I am always talking about money. Like, this is what I live for. Data. Constantly, I'm thinking about it all the time. But what it also did was it sparked something inside of me that I was not expecting. Monica and I started doing the math, looking at housing, looking at jobs, and we realized something most nurses don't. Where you live and work is one of the biggest factors in whether you stay broke or get ahead. We had been in New York far too long. This is where I grew up. Simply because we didn't know any better and we didn't have the data and we didn't know anyone who had figured it out. So that day we planned a trip to California for the first time ever. The first time we came to California, we went to Southern California because we thought, well, the weather, we hear great things about the weather down here. So we imagined ourselves living in Southern California where the temperatures were in the 70s year round and the humidity was nothing like it was in New York City. But when we got to San Diego and we started looking for apartments, we realized that the cost of living was just like New York City. And then when we found out how much nurses get paid in Southern California, it made no sense to us. How could nurses in California, a state where the cost of living was way higher than New York, pay nurses the same as they do in New York? So we went back to the drawing board, we went back to New York City, and we planned another trip to San Francisco. This was only a few weeks apart. So when we got to San Francisco, we found out that the wages were really high. I started looking for jobs in San Francisco, but then we started looking at the cost of living, and all I saw was $1 million homes. There was no way, even with the amount of money that we were making, that we were going to be able to buy a house in San Francisco. So that was out of the question. But before we left that trip, I remember calling my friend who had previously worked with me at New York Presbyterian. He left to California before I did, but I didn't know where he was living. So I gave him a call and I asked him if we could go and visit him. He told us he was living in Roseville, California. And I do remember having a brief conversation with him about Sacramento, California. So when he told us Roseville, California, I didn't even know where that was in the map. But I looked it up and it was about a 1.5 hour drive from San Francisco. So we made the drive, and on the way over there, I remember he had previously told me that he was renting an apartment with his wife and his 3 kids at the time. And as we're driving to this neighborhood, all I see is houses. It's a suburban area and all I see is houses. So we pull up to this gigantic house. And as we walk towards the door and we begin to knock on the door, he comes to the front door, opens it, and I ask him what they're doing in this house. I was under the impression that they were renting this house. And he tells me that he forgot to mention that he and his wife had just purchased this house about a month ago, about 8 months after they moved to California. And my mind was blown away because all I heard about California was that it's the most expensive place in the country. It's the most expensive state in the country. But he began to break down all of the numbers that just made me drool by the end of the night. He talked about how he was making well over $80 an hour. And this was in 2017. I was making around $50 an hour at the time in New York City. So he was making over $30 an hour. That just, I didn't even know that existed. I didn't know that was a thing. But then he kept going. He kept telling me how California has ratios. If you're in an ER, if you're working as an ER nurse, which we were, and you have a critical patient, a patient that just comes in and is a code, that's a 1-to-1. If you have a critical care patient who's stable, it's a 1-to-2. So you can't get more than 2 patients. If you have a patient that's on a titratable drip, that's a 1-to-3. You can't get more than 3. And the highest number of patients you can get in an ER is 4. And this was a thing across the board in acute care settings. So regardless of the unit that you worked in, you were gonna have ratios. So as long as you were a bedside nurse and you were working in a hospital, there were ratio laws that protected you. And coming from New York, where first of all, the salary was abysmally low, right? And in addition to that, we had no ratios. I remember coming off orientation one time, and literally this was like within the first week of me off orientation. I had been a fairly new nurse. I was a tele nurse before going to the ER, but I had only done that for about 11 to 12 months. In my first week as an ER nurse, I had 17 patients. I don't even know what I was doing with myself in the ER at that point. I don't know why I even lasted as long as I did. I stayed there for 3 years. But now, here we are. We made the move to Northern California. As soon as my former coworker had told me all these good things, Monica and I applied for our licenses, we packed our things, and now together we can easily make over $400,000 a year combined if we worked 36 hours per week. But since moving here, we've paid off all of our debt except for our house, and we finally have time to be with our family because we've been able to start a business, reduce our hours at work, and still make over $300,000 per year combined while working fewer than 20 hours per week. And this isn't just about hourly pay. That's what most people don't get. It's about what you get to keep, because $100 per hour in one city might be way worse than $70 an hour in another city, once you account for housing, taxes, gas, groceries, and everything else. So this is why from the moment we moved here, I started collecting data and I began to build tools that would help nurses make smarter decisions. I created a cost of living calculator so you can compare cities based on what you'll actually take home, and you can now compare salaries for over 50 professions in that spreadsheet. So, for example, as a registered nurse, the city that pays nurses who choose to own a house the most is Vallejo, California, where the median salary is $164,960. Home prices are $537,667, and you're left with $63,311 as a single person after your taxes and mortgage payments are deducted. I even built a top California hospital spreadsheet that lets nurses see how much they could earn on an hourly, weekly, monthly, or yearly basis based on their experience and their preferred shift. So let's just say you're a night shift nurse with 5 years of experience and you want to know exactly how much you could get paid at one of the top paying hospitals in California. The spreadsheet does that for you. And just in case you were curious, you could be earning $223,921 at a hospital like El Camino with only 5 years of experience. And then I created the Nurses to Riches Accelerator program to show nurses how to move to Northern California so that they can make over $200,000 per year while working fewer than 40 hours per week. And after all of these years and all of these spreadsheets and all of these videos, we're finally building an app. It's called Map My Pay, and it's an app that's going to let nurses search for salaries with cost of living data of other cities. They're also going to be able to compare their current city and profession to thousands of other data points in our database. And nurses will be able to share their pay stubs with one another in our community page. Plus, you can see what your retirement portfolio may look like based on the city that you're interested in moving to. It's an app like no one in the nursing profession has ever seen. And honestly, I can't believe this doesn't already exist. This app, Map My Pay, is going to help nurses answer questions like, how much will I actually take home after taxes? Where can I afford to live on a nurse's salary? Is it better to rent or buy in this city? Or what cities are the safest and pay the most? Or something like, what's the weather like in this city? Or what are the schools like where I might move to? We pull salary data for registered nurses, nurse practitioners, CRNAs, LPNs, CNAs, and more. And then we calculate your take-home pay after taxes and rent or your mortgage payments. And we're also going to be including crime scores, demographic information. So just in case you're interested in finding out what the median income is of the city you want to move to, or maybe you want to find out what the age makeup looks like in that particular city, or maybe you want to find out what the education level is like, or maybe you want to find out what the race makeup looks like in case if you're someone who values diversity in the city that you live in. You're also going to be able to compare cities side by side. You're going to be able to browse posts and pay stubs from real nurses in our community, and even use our investment calculator to see how far your income could take you. It's everything that we wish we had when we were trying to figure all of this stuff out. So here's what I know now. Your salary can be a life-changing tool, but only if you know how to use it. If you feel stuck right now, if you feel like you're always working but never getting ahead, I promise, it doesn't have to stay that way. Monica and I thought $110,000 a year was our individual ceiling. We thought the only way to make more was to grind harder. We were 100% wrong. Now we figured it out. We're sharing everything we know, so no other nurse has to stay broke, burnt out, or be left behind. So if you're watching this thinking, how do I get started? Here's what I recommend. First, run your numbers through our salaries and cost of living spreadsheet, or download the top California hospital spreadsheet to see what you could be making based on your experience, your shift, and the city you want to live in. And if you're serious about changing your situation, join the Nurses to Riches Accelerator program. I will walk you through the entire process step by step so you can land a high-paying job, work fewer hours, and finally get ahead. And if you want access to all of this data, salaries, cost of living, housing, retirement projections right at your fingertips, go to mapmypay.com or click on this QR code right over here and join the waitlist to get notified when the app is released. And if you enjoyed this video, then you're going to love this video here, where I talk about how Monica and I made well over $300,000 last year.